What if the only way to survive was to surrender? What if every dream you ever had was crushed beneath the weight of a broken promise? Obi left home to escape poverty, but he walked straight into the hands of a master who saw him as nothing more than a tool to be used, bent, and discarded. He watched his sister's fate become a whisper in the wind, his brother in arms reduced to madness, and his own soul eroded by endless servitude. But when the shadows in the shop began to move, when the whispers of the past refused to stay silent, he realized this wasn't just suffering. It was something else. Something watching. Something waiting. Now, the question isn't whether Obi will survive, but whether he will escape before he, too, is swallowed whole. If this story has gripped you already, you won't believe what's coming next. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss this. Now, let's dive in. The sun over Yumyuk village bore witness to countless tragedies, but none more harrowing than the fate of Adiz, the eldest daughter of the Nwosu family. Born into poverty so deep that hunger was a familiar guest, she had once been the family's brightest hope. But desperation is a cruel sculptor, reshaping destinies with merciless hands. When Adiz left home in search of work, she was lured into the shadows of the city, where survival demanded more than just hard work. Her letters home grew infrequent, then stopped. When news finally arrived, it came not from her lips, but from a whisper carried by the wind. Adiz was dead, her body found in the gutters of an unforgiving city, discarded like refuse. Grief strangled the Nwosu household. Their mother wailed until her voice became dust. Their father, once proud, shrank into silence. And Obi, Adiz's younger brother, was left with nothing but rage and resolve. He would not meet the same fate. He would not be swallowed by the city's appetite for the desperate. So when an Oga from Onitsha came to the village looking for apprentices, Obi's father seized the opportunity, placing his son's future in the hands of a stranger, hoping that servitude was a better fate than the streets. At 13, Obi left Yumyuk with nothing but a tattered bag and the weight of his family's expectations. Onitsha's markets roared with life, a maze of shouts, barter, and sweat. His Oga, Master Afani, was a merchant of considerable wealth, his shop stacked high with imported goods. But wealth does not equate to kindness. Obi quickly learned that a NWA boy was not just an apprentice, but a servant, bound by unwritten laws that demanded obedience, silence, and endurance. For years, he bore the weight of the shop's demands, rising before dawn, scrubbing floors, carrying heavy loads, and enduring his Oga's scorn. He was not alone in his suffering. The shop was filled with other apprentices, each with their own burdens, each fighting against an unseen tide. There was Chaik, who had been with Master Afani for 6 years yet still slept on a thin mat in the storeroom, his dreams of owning his own shop slowly eroding. There was Ikin, who once tried to leave after his Oga beat him mercilessly, only to return weeks later, broken and penniless, having realized there was nowhere else to go. The promise of settlement dangled before them all like a mirage, an illusion that kept them obedient. Obi watched Chaik's hope fade with each passing year, and he saw how Ikin's spirit was crushed under the weight of betrayal. There were nights when Obi himself lay awake, staring at the wooden ceiling, his stomach growling, his heart aching for home. He missed his mother's gentle touch, the sound of his father's deep voice, the way Adiz used to hum while cooking. The loneliness was unbearable. More than once, he thought of running, but where would he go? Poverty had already stolen his sister, it had its claws in him too. One evening, after an especially brutal day of labor, Obi sat outside the shop, exhausted beyond words. "I can't do this anymore," he muttered under his breath. Chaik, sitting beside him, sighed heavily. "None of us can," he said, "but we do. Because we have no choice." Chaik had been more than just a fellow apprentice, he had become the older brother Obi never had. He was the one who showed Obi how to endure the harshest beatings, where to find leftover food when hunger gnawed too deeply, and how to wrap his wounds with torn cloth when the punishments were too severe. Chike shielded him from the worst of Master Afani's wrath when he could, taking blame for small mistakes just to keep Obi from suffering. Over time, Obi had grown attached to him, leaning on his quiet strength, clinging to his whispered reassurances in the dead of night when despair threatened to consume them both. But as Chike's time of apprenticeship neared its end, Master Afani became restless. The older apprentices whispered about how he had done the same with others before, promising settlement yet finding ways to delay it indefinitely. At first, he claimed Chike was not yet ready, that he had not learned enough to run a business on his own. Then, he began accusing Chike of fabricated offenses, stealing money, neglecting duties, being disrespectful. Each accusation came with severe punishment, but Chike endured, determined to claim what was rightfully his. One evening, Master Afani called Chike into his office and spoke in a calm but chilling tone. "You think you deserve settlement? After all I have done for you?" Chike, weary but resolute, nodded. He had served faithfully for years. He had earned it. That same night, Chike was assigned double the workload. He was forced to carry sacks of goods up and down the storage room until his muscles burned and his legs threatened to give out. Frustration boiling over, he stormed into Master Afani's office and demanded his settlement. The argument that ensued shook the very walls of the shop. Chike, for the first time, refused to bow. His voice trembled with rage, his fists clenched at his sides. He threatened to report Master Afani to the trade union, to expose his years of exploitation. The next morning, Chike did not wake up the same. He was found outside the shop, laughing, muttering to himself, his eyes vacant. He ran into the streets, tearing at his clothes, screaming about unseen hands trying to strangle him. The apprentices stood frozen in horror. Obi watched, his blood running cold, as the brother he had come to love unraveled before his eyes. Master Afani acted bewildered, shaking his head as if in pity. "Some people cannot handle the pressures of life," he sighed. But Obi knew. They all knew. Something unnatural had happened that night. And as Chike was dragged away, never to return, a deep terror settled into Obi's bones, one that whispered he might be next. The shop business moved on as if nothing had happened, but Obi did not. The weight of Chike's absence crushed him. That night, as he lay awake on the hard wooden floor, something inside him snapped. He had lost Adiz to the streets and now Chike to servitude. How much more could he endure before he, too, was swallowed whole? After Chike's sudden descent into madness, Obi became a shadow of himself. Fear clung to him like a second skin, but he knew he could not leave, not yet. He convinced himself that if he kept his head down and endured, he would eventually be settled. The dream of freedom and owning his own business became his only anchor. However, Master Afani's demeanor toward him changed. The Oga would watch him closely, speaking to him in a softer yet more unsettling tone, as if testing his loyalty. The apprentices whispered in hushed voices about Chike's fate, but no one dared to speak openly. Obi began noticing the way his master toyed with his hopes, dangling the promise of settlement, then snatching it away just as quickly. "Patience," Master Afani would say, "a good apprentice must prove his worth." Then, strange things began happening. Obi would wake up in the middle of the night, feeling as though someone was watching him. Shadows seemed to move unnaturally in the dimly lit corridors of the shop. Once, he swore he heard Chike's voice whisper his name in the wind. He dismissed it, blaming his exhaustion, but deep inside, a seed of doubt had been planted. Then, more unsettling events followed. Tools would go missing, only to reappear in places he was certain he hadn't left them. The cash register once opened on its own in the dead of night, sending a loud clank echoing through the shop. There were moments when the lights flickered, even though there was no power outage. One evening, while sweeping the floor, Obi saw a shadow dart across the back room, but when he checked, nothing was there. The other apprentices whispered that they, too, felt an eerie presence, but none dared to speak too loudly. Fear became a silent companion in that shop, and Obi could no longer shake the feeling that something unseen was watching him. The burden of helplessness weighed heavily on Obi, and so, in secret letters smuggled through a kind-hearted trader, he told his mother everything, about Chaik, the strange happenings, the broken promises. His mother, a deeply religious woman, did what she knew best. She prayed and fasted. But beneath her unwavering faith lay a mother's deep, unrelenting fear. She had already lost one child to the cruelty of the world, her beloved daughter, who had been swallowed by hardship and despair. The thought of losing Obi, her only son, to forces beyond her understanding kept her awake at night. She wept in the silence of her small room, clutching his childhood clothes, remembering the days when he was innocent and untouched by the world's wickedness. The pain of her daughter's fate still gnawed at her, and she refused to let history repeat itself. She fasted until she was weak, cried until her voice was hoarse, and prayed until her knees ached. "God, not again," she pleaded. "Not my son." Every morning, she would rise before the sun and call upon divine intervention. She stormed the heavens, declaring that her son would not be swallowed by darkness. She sought out pastors and elders, igniting a spiritual war on Obi's behalf. Back at the shop, Obi began to notice something different. Master Afani grew more agitated. Business deals that once ran smoothly now faced inexplicable obstacles. Customers who once praised him now spoke of feeling uneasy in his presence. He would sit in his office, muttering to himself, looking over his shoulders as if he sensed something unseen. He began losing his temper over the smallest mistakes, slamming his fists on the counter and shouting at apprentices for imagined offenses. The apprentices whispered about how his once prized customers began avoiding him, crossing the street when they saw him approaching. More strangely, some of his most trusted suppliers started pulling out of deals, citing bad luck and unforeseen circumstances. One night, Obi walked into the storage room and overheard a conversation between his Oga and a mysterious visitor. "The boy is protected," the visitor whispered. "If you push too hard, it may backfire." Obi felt his blood turn to ice. Who was protecting him? Was it his mother's prayers? Or something else entirely? Sensing a shift he could not explain, Master Afani resorted to crueler tactics. He accused Obi of theft, staged mistakes in his bookkeeping, and even spread false rumors that Obi was plotting against him. But each time, something seemed to intervene. A missing document would miraculously reappear, a false witness would hesitate under questioning, and business associates began pressuring Master Afani to settle Obi before unforeseen misfortunes befell him. Master Afani himself began to experience strange misfortunes. His most trusted business partner suffered a sudden stroke after a heated conversation about Obi's settlement. His prized shipment of goods mysteriously vanished en route, causing him a severe financial loss. He woke up some mornings with deep scratches on his arms, though his doors had been locked from the inside. At night, he heard footsteps in the shop when no one was there. On one occasion, he saw a shadow in the storeroom that looked eerily like Chaik, staring at him with hollow eyes before vanishing into thin air. Fear clawed at him, and for the first time, he truly considered that something beyond his control was at play. Then, something terrifying happened. Master Afani woke up one morning unable to speak properly. His words came out jumbled, as if his tongue had turned against him. He staggered through the shop, gripping his throat in panic. He recovered later that day, but his confidence had been shaken. It was as if a force greater than him was pushing back. In a final act of desperation, Master Afani called Obi into his office late at night. His eyes burned with an intensity Obi had never seen before. He leaned forward, his voice low and menacing. "Tell me, boy," he hissed. What powers do you use? Who is behind you? Obi's breath caught in his throat. Powers? I don't understand, sir, he stammered, his hands trembling. Master Afani let out a bitter chuckle. Don't play dumb with me. First, Chike, now this? I have done everything to break you, but you stand untouched. My business crumbles, yet you remain standing. What force protects you? His voice rose, his rage barely contained. Obi shrank back, the fear creeping into his bones. I only have God, sir. And my mother's prayers. Master Afani's eyes darkened. Then leave. But know this, you will suffer if you go. Out there, no one will help you. Obi, with newfound resolve, met his master's gaze. I will take my chances, he replied. True to Master Afani's words, Obi's path to independence was anything but easy. He used his small settlement to rent a tiny shop, filled it with goods, and waited for customers. But customers were scarce. His competitors, well established in the market, spread rumors that he was inexperienced and unreliable. The weight of debts, competition, and the lingering trauma of his apprenticeship threatened to crush him. There were nights he went hungry, days he questioned if he had made a mistake. Then, disaster struck. One evening, after closing his shop, Obi received a call that his store was on fire. He rushed back, only to find the flames devouring everything he had worked for. The fire department arrived too late. By morning, all that remained were ashes. Obi stood before the ruins, his heart shattered. It felt like Master Afani's curse had followed him. He sank to his knees, defeated. Obi's lingering fear and continued service, then, the twist came. Just when he thought all hope was lost, a familiar but unexpected figure approached him. It was a former apprentice, Emeka, one who had served under another ruthless master and had also struggled after his settlement. Obi had barely interacted with him in the past, but he knew Emeka had once been in his shoes, fighting to survive in the brutal world of business. Emeka sighed deeply, his eyes filled with a knowing sadness. Obi, I heard what happened. I know this pain. I've been there too. And I know what it means to start from nothing. Obi hesitated. Why are you here? Why help me? He asked, his voice hoarse from frustration and exhaustion. Emeka chuckled dryly. Because I was once abandoned when I needed help the most. If someone had stepped in for me, maybe my struggles wouldn't have been so harsh. I can't change my past, but I can change someone else's future. Let's build something together. With that, Emeka extended a hand, offering Obi the opportunity to partner in a business venture. It was not a miracle solution, but it was a chance, a real one. They pooled their resources, shared knowledge, and leaned on each other when times were rough. The road remained tough, but this time, Obi wasn't entirely alone. But his mother never stopped praying. And little by little, Obi's fortunes began to shift. An old trader remembered his hard work and brought him business. Other young merchants, also former apprentices, joined forces with him, creating a network of trust and cooperation. The market was still cruel, full of deceit and sabotage, but together, they navigated the challenges. Obi learned to strike deals, negotiate better prices, and build strong relationships with suppliers. His small business started to gain traction. There were setbacks. A dishonest supplier once sold him spoiled goods, causing a loss that nearly wiped out his savings. At one point, a rival trader, jealous of Obi's slow but steady success, spread rumors that his shop was cursed, driving away customers. But Obi endured. He worked tirelessly, often staying up late into the night to strategize, to find ways to stay afloat. His partners, fellow businessmen who had once been apprentices like him, encouraged him, and together, they weathered the storm. After years of struggle, Obi finally gained stability. His shop expanded, his reputation grew, and he became a respected trader in the market. Yet, even in his success, he never forgot the pain of his past. He made sure to help struggling apprentices, giving them fair wages and treating them with dignity, the very things he was denied. Years later, Obi stood before his small but thriving store, watching a young boy sweep the entrance. He saw himself in that boy, the same hunger, the same desperation for a future beyond servitude. He vowed never to become another master of Fani. He would break the cycle. Yet, in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the market streets, he sometimes felt a presence. A shadow of the past. A reminder that though he had escaped, the ghosts of the ones who didn't still lingered. And so, Obi carried on, not fully free, but not entirely lost either. But deep down, he knew, some things were never truly over.